I pointed my rifle at him, finger on the trigger. He was bleeding out in the snow, and I had every reason to pull it. But what I did next haunted me for 80 years. My name is Frank. I'm 98 years old now, and most days I can barely remember what I had for breakfast. But December 1944, that day in the Ardennes forest during the Battle of the Bulge, I remember every single second like it happened this morning. The cold that burned your lungs, the sound of artillery that never stopped, and the choice I made that changed everything I thought I knew about war, about enemies, about what it means to be human. It was the 16th of December when the Germans launched their offensive. We weren't ready. Nobody was. Intelligence had told us the Germans were finished, that they didn't have the resources for another major attack. They were wrong, dead wrong. We were part of the 106th Infantry Division, green troops mostly, kids who'd barely finished basic training before they shipped us overseas. I was 20 years old and thought I knew what war was. I'd seen the training films. I'd heard the stories from the guys who'd been at Normandy, but nothing prepares you for the real thing. The first day was chaos, pure chaos. German artillery rained down on our positions before dawn. The sound alone was enough to make grown men cry. Trees exploded into splinters. The ground shook so hard you couldn't stand up straight. And then came the tanks. Panzers rolling through the forest like metal monsters, their guns tearing apart everything in their path. We fell back, kept falling back. Command was screaming orders over the radio, but half the time the radios didn't work. Officers were getting killed or separated from their units. Small groups of us just tried to stay alive, tried to keep moving west, away from the advancing German lines. By the third day, I was part of a group of maybe 15 guys. We'd lost contact with the rest of our company. We were low on ammunition, low on food, and the cold was killing us as much as the Germans were. The temperature had dropped to below zero. We didn't have proper winter gear. My boots had holes in them. My hands were so cold I could barely feel them enough to pull a trigger. Guys were getting frostbite. One private, kid named Tommy from Ohio, his feet had turned black. We all knew what that meant, but nobody said it out loud. We were moving through this dense forest, trying to avoid German patrols, when we heard it. Gunfire. Close. Maybe 200 yards ahead. Our sergeant, a tough guy from Brooklyn named Davies, held up his fist and we all dropped down. We waited, listened. The shooting stopped. Then we heard screaming. Someone was screaming in pain. Davies sent 2 scouts forward. They came back 10 minutes later and reported what they'd found. There'd been a skirmish between a German patrol and what looked like a small American unit. Both sides had taken casualties and retreated, but they'd left their wounded behind. That's how desperate things were. Nobody could afford to slow down for the wounded anymore. Davies made the call. We'd move through the area quickly, see if any of our guys were still alive, and keep moving. We couldn't stay in one place too long or we'd get caught. We crept forward, weapons ready, expecting an ambush at any second. That's when we found them. 3 American soldiers, all dead, shot multiple times. And then, about 30 feet away, half hidden behind a fallen tree, I saw him. A German soldier. He was young, maybe younger than me. Couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. He was wearing the gray uniform of the Wehrmacht, and there was blood everywhere. He'd been shot in the stomach and the leg. He was conscious, barely, and when he saw us coming, I watched the fear flash across his face.
Davies walked up to him. rifle pointed at his chest. The rest of us formed a perimeter, watching the trees for any sign of more Germans. The wounded soldier tried to say something, but he was too weak. He just looked up at Davies with these wide, terrified eyes. Davies searched him quickly, found a pistol, and tossed it away. No other weapons, no grenades. The kid was done fighting. "Leave him," Davies said. "We keep moving." That should have been the end of it. In war, you don't stop for the enemy. You can't. Every second you waste is a second that could get you killed. Every resource you use on them is a resource taken away from your own survival. I knew this. We all knew this. But as I looked at that German soldier bleeding in the snow, something inside me wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was because he looked so young. Maybe it was because I could see my own little brother in his face. Maybe it was because, somewhere deep down, I still believed there were rules. That even in war, there had to be some line you didn't cross. "Sergeant," I said, "we can't just leave him like this." Davies turned to look at me like I'd lost my mind. "The hell we can't? He's the enemy, Frank. He'd do the same to you." "He's dying." "Good. That's 3 less Germans we have to worry about." The other guys were looking at me now, some with confusion, some with anger. We were all exhausted, all scared, all just trying to survive. And here I was, wanting to waste time and supplies on a German soldier who would have shot me dead without hesitation if our positions were reversed. But I couldn't shake it. I looked at that kid and I saw a human being. Not a Nazi, not some evil monster we'd been taught to hate. Just a scared teenager who was going to die alone in a frozen forest thousands of miles from his home. I thought about his mother. I thought about whether he had a girlfriend waiting for him. I thought about all the things he'd never get to do, never get to see, because of this stupid, brutal war. "Go," I said to Davies. "I'll catch up." Davies stared at me for a long moment. I could see him calculating whether it was worth the time to argue, whether he should just order someone to drag me away. Finally, he shook his head. "You're going to get yourself killed over a kraut. Stupid. Waste of a good soldier." He signaled to the others and they moved out. Just like that, I was alone with the enemy. The German soldier had watched this whole exchange with confusion in his eyes. He probably didn't understand English well enough to follow what we'd been arguing about, but he could read body language. He knew his own people had left him, and now he'd just watched my people leave me too. I knelt down beside him and started examining his wounds. The stomach wound was bad, really bad. Blood was soaking through his uniform and pooling in the snow beneath him. The leg wound was cleaner, a through and through, but he'd lost a lot of blood from that too. I pulled out my medical kit. We all carried basic first aid supplies, though most of us barely knew how to use them properly. I'd paid attention during the training, though. My dad'd been a doctor back home, and I'd always thought maybe I'd follow in his footsteps. Funny how life works out sometimes.
"I'm going to help you," I said, even though I knew he probably didn't understand. "Just stay still." I started with the leg wound because it was easier. I cleaned it as best I could with the little bit of water I had in my canteen, then packed it with gauze and wrapped it tight. The German soldier watched me work, his breathing shallow and rapid. He was going into shock. The stomach wound was going to kill him if I didn't do something, but I wasn't a surgeon. I didn't have the tools or the knowledge to fix internal bleeding. I did what I could. I packed the wound, applied pressure, gave him a shot of morphine from my kit to help with the pain. The morphine worked fast. I watched his face relax a little, the agony fading into a distant numbness. He looked at me with these grateful, confused eyes. Why was I doing this? Why was an American soldier trying to save his life? "What's your name?" I asked, knowing he probably couldn't answer. But he surprised me. "Heinrich," he whispered. His English was broken but understandable. "Heinrich Müller. I'm Frank Morrison." He nodded slightly. Then, with great effort, he reached into his coat pocket. I tensed up, hand going to my rifle, but he just pulled out a small photograph. It was wrinkled and stained with blood, but I could still make out the image. A woman, pretty, with light hair and a soft smile. Standing next to her was Heinrich, younger, in civilian clothes, both of them laughing about something. "Wife," he said. "Anna." I felt my throat tighten. Of course, he had a wife. Of course, he had someone waiting for him back home, someone who had no idea that right now his husband was bleeding out in a forest in Belgium. I thought about my own girl back home, Sarah, with her red hair and freckles, the way she'd cried when I shipped out. "She's beautiful," I said. Heinrich smiled weakly. "Baby," he said, putting his hand on his stomach, though I couldn't tell if he meant the wound or if he was trying to tell me his wife was pregnant. Then his eyes met mine with sudden urgency. He said, "Please, tell her." I didn't know what to say. I couldn't make that promise. I didn't even know if I was going to survive this war, let alone track down some German woman I'd never met to deliver a message from her dying husband. But looking at his face, seeing the desperate hope there, I couldn't bring myself to take that away from him. "I'll try," I said. "I promise, I'll try." That's when I heard the voices, German voices, close, too close. They were speaking quickly, urgently, and they were getting closer. A patrol, had to be. They were probably looking for survivors from the earlier battle, or maybe they'd tracked Davies and the others. Either way, I was in serious trouble. I was alone, with limited ammunition, taking care of an enemy soldier. If they found me, I was dead, no question about it. Heinrich heard them too. His eyes went wide with fear, but not for himself, for me. He grabbed my arm with surprising strength and started trying to say something, but he was too weak and the morphine had made him groggy. I put my finger to my lips, telling him to stay quiet, but he kept trying to gesture, kept trying to tell me something. The voices were getting louder. I could hear boots crunching through the snow. Multiple soldiers, at least 4 or 5 from the sound of it. I had maybe 30 seconds before they'd be on top of us. I looked down at Heinrich. I could shoot him, put him out of his misery, and eliminate a witness. Then I could try to slip away, hide, maybe evade the patrol. That was the smart play, the survival play. I raised my rifle. He saw it. He stopped struggling and just looked at me with this expression of sad understanding. He knew. He knew this was how it ended. He closed his eyes and waited for the bullet. His lips moved in what looked like a prayer. I put my finger on the trigger, applied just the slightest pressure. All I had to do was squeeze. 1 shot, then run.
But I couldn't. After everything I'd just done, after all the time and supplies I'd wasted trying to save this kid's life, I couldn't kill him. It would make everything meaningless. It would prove Davies was right, that mercy was just weakness, that in war there's no room for humanity. And I couldn't accept that. I wouldn't accept that. I made my choice.
I dropped down next to Heinrich and pulled him behind the fallen tree, making us both as hidden as possible. Then I draped myself over him, covering us both with whatever branches and snow I could reach. It wasn't much. If the Germans looked carefully, they'd spot us, but it was all I had. The patrol emerged from the trees. 5 soldiers, all armed, all looking alert and dangerous. They were sweeping the area systematically, checking bodies, looking for survivors or equipment they could salvage. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they'd hear it. Heinrich was barely breathing beneath me, either from the wounds or from trying to stay quiet. The Germans moved closer. One of them walked right past our hiding spot, so close I could have reached out and touched his boots. He paused, looked around. I held my breath, kept perfectly still. Then Heinrich did something I'll never understand. He started talking, speaking in German, weak, but loud enough for the patrol to hear. They spun around, weapons raised, and spotted us immediately. I braced myself for the bullets, but they didn't shoot. They were confused. They saw one of their own wounded soldiers being protected by an American. Heinrich kept talking, explaining something to him in rapid German. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the tone. He was pleading with them, asking them for something. One of the German soldiers, an older guy who seemed to be in charge, lowered his weapon and walked over to us. He looked at Heinrich, then at me, then back at Heinrich. They had a short conversation. Then the German sergeant did something that shocked me to my core. He reached down and helped me to my feet. He didn't tie my hands, didn't take my weapon, just helped me up and gestured for 2 of his men to take care of Heinrich. "You saved him," the German sergeant said, in heavily accented but clear English. "Why?" I didn't know how to answer that. How do you explain something you barely understand yourself? "Because it was right," I finally said. The sergeant studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Go," he said, pointing west toward where I hoped American lines still were. Before I changed my mind. "What about him?" I asked, looking at Heinrich. "We take care of our own. Now go, quickly." I started to move, but Heinrich called out to me, "Frank." I turned back. He had tears in his eyes. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you." I nodded. Couldn't speak. Didn't trust my voice. Then I ran through the forest like the devil himself was chasing me, ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. I eventually found an American patrol and made it back to what was left of my unit. Davies was furious that I'd survived, said I'd wasted everyone's time. But I didn't care. I knew what I'd done. I knew it mattered. The Battle of the Bulge raged on for another month. Thousands died on both sides. We pushed the Germans back eventually, but the cost was enormous. I've survived the war, made it home in 1945. Married Sarah, had 3 kids, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren so far. Built a good life. But I never forgot Heinrich Müller and that day in the Ardennes forest. For years I wondered what happened to him. Did he survive his wounds? Did he make it home to Anna? Did he ever get to meet his child if she was pregnant? I had no way of knowing. The war ended, Germany was divided, and tracking down one soldier out of millions seemed impossible. I tried a few times over the years, but never got anywhere. Eventually, I accepted that I'd never know. Some stories don't get neat endings.
But then, in 2003, something incredible happened. I got a letter. It was from Germany, forwarded through the VA because someone had tracked down my military records. Inside was a letter written in English, translated from German. It was from a woman named Anna Mueller, Heinrich's wife. She said her husband had passed away in 1998, but before he died, he'd told her about the American soldier who saved his life in the Ardennes. He'd never forgotten me, never stopped being grateful. He'd tried to find me too over the years, but had no luck. Anna said Heinrich had come home from the war. He'd survived his wounds. They had had a son in 1945, named him Friedrich. Heinrich had become a teacher, spent his life educating young people about the horrors of war and the importance of choosing compassion even in the darkest times. He'd told the story of the American soldier who'd risked everything to save an enemy hundreds of times. And Anna wanted me to know that his life and the life of their son and their 3 grandchildren all existed because of what I did that day. I sat at my kitchen table and cried like a baby when I read that letter. All those years wondering if I'd made the right choice, wondering if it had mattered. And finally I had my answer. It mattered. One act of mercy in the middle of hell had rippled out across decades. Heinrich got to be a father, a teacher, a grandfather. His family existed because I couldn't pull that trigger. Because even in war, even when everything tells you to hate and kill and survive at any cost, there's still room for humanity. There has to be. People ask me sometimes what I learned from the war. They expect me to talk about courage or sacrifice or patriotism. Those things matter, sure, but what I learned in that frozen forest in December 1944 is something different. I learned that the enemy isn't always evil, that sometimes the guy shooting at you is just as scared and confused and human as you are. That war doesn't change what's right and wrong, it just makes it harder to see. And I learned that the choices we make in our darkest moments define us more than anything else in our lives. I'm 98 years old now. I don't have much time left. Most of the guys I served with are gone. The war that defined our generation is fading into history books and documentaries. But I need people to remember this story. I need them to understand that even in the worst circumstances humanity has ever created, we still have a choice. We can choose to see the humanity in others. We can choose compassion over convenience. We can believe that every life matters even when everything around us screams that it doesn't. Heinrich Mueller was supposed to be my enemy. I was supposed to kill him. That's what soldiers do. But I couldn't. And because I couldn't, a family exists in Germany today that wouldn't otherwise. A teacher spent 50 years shaping young minds. Grandchildren exist who never would have been born. That's the ripple effect of choosing mercy. That's what happens when you risk everything for what's right. I don't know if I'm a hero. I never felt like one. I was just a scared kid who couldn't walk away from another scared kid who needed help. But if my story can inspire even one person to choose compassion in their own dark moment,
then maybe it meant something. Maybe all of it, the fear and the cold and the risk, maybe it all meant something after all. If this story moved you, subscribe to hear more.